Germany is hot. I don't mean individual Germans, but the country itself is getting hotter.
Welcome to YD. Why do Germans do things the way they do?
I actually made a video recently about how people in Germany have coped with the summer for decades without needing air conditioning. It's not as if we are unfamiliar with air conditioning. Pretty much every new car from the last 15 or 20 years has air conditioning. Office buildings often have air conditioning, and sometimes a train service is cancelled because the air conditioning breaks down in the summer. But in private homes, this is rather rare. Now, however, we are facing man made climate change and it's getting hotter and hotter. There are a few fools or people who stand to gain by denying it, but almost all specialist publications confirm the human impact on climate change, and Europe is right at the forefront when it comes to rising temperatures. A month ago, Germany was sweltering in the heat. In some areas, temperatures exceeded 40 degrees Celsius for 3 days running. And at those temperatures, the measures mentioned are already reaching the limits. The number of heat related deaths shows just how dangerous the heat wave in Germany was. In that week, a good 7,000 more people died in Germany than the average for the last 4 years. I cannot recall a single day in Germany exceeding 40 degrees Celsius during my youth, and even temperatures above 30 degrees were only reached in the height of summer, and even then only occasionally in North Rhine-Westphalia. During my research, I came across these statistics showing locations in Germany where temperatures exceeded 40 degrees between 1983 and 2022. The most recent years are not included. Of the 31 entries, 25 are from 25th July 2019, one from 24th July 2019, two from the 7th August 2015, three from the 20th July 2022, one each from the 12th and 13th August 2003, and one from the 27th July 1983. So we've never had a day this early in the year in June with temperatures of above 40 degrees. And apart from one day in 1983, it took 20 years until 2003 for us to reach those temperatures again. And since 2015, this is no longer anything about of the ordinary. Currently, the government, or to be precise, the state and federal governments, are calling for heat protection plans to be drawn up and implemented. The EU had already debated this a few years ago, and corresponding plans were drawn up as early as 2025. I too have noticed in local government that such measures have been discussed. Cities are to have more green spaces and there are to be public drinking water dispensers. However, the problem for local authorities is that these need to be maintained and cleaned daily. These are costs that the local authorities have to bear and they are currently short of funds. The same applies to local hospitals. There's a shortage of funds there too. Discussions are also currently taking place regarding healthcare costs, and a law has just been passed designing to cap these costs. So certain points raised in the video healthcare in Germany probably need to be revisited. The majority of hospitals in Germany were built in the 1960s and 1970s, and although many are now privately owned, there is often a backlog of modernization work. Back then, it was important to heat the building in winter, which brings us back to air conditioning. Back then, it was frowned upon, considered unnecessary for the few hot days of the year and a major drain of energy. As a result, many hospitals still do not have air conditioning installed, which makes treating heat stroke victims even more difficult. A lot of energy is still required for this, but with suitable solar panels, enough electricity can be generated on hot days. In private homes, we've been seeing more and more heat pumps recently. Depending on how the heating is set up in the house, whether via radiators or through the ventilation system, the latter option can also provide cooling in summer. But older people, in particular, often live in older buildings that were designed with heating and heat retention in mind. However, Germany still has some catching up to do this in regard. A large-scale heat pump is being built at Niele Harbor in Cologne, which is set to heat 50,000 households using heat from the water of the Rhine. Whilst Germany used to be something of a laggard when it came to heat pumps, it has caught up in the recent years. And in new building properties, the heat pump is now the heating system of choice and, as mentioned, depending on the model, can also serve as an air conditioning system. It's just a shame that the current Minister for Economic Affairs is once again acting in the interest of fossil fuels and watering down the sensible legislation aimed to the gradual introduction of more renewable energy. This was also picked up in Queer, a satirical program on Bayerischer Rundfunk, which asked why hundreds of billions are being spent on arming ourselves against a possible Russian attack on Europe, but not against potential global warming. Good question. Incidentally, the fact that the worst case scenario of global warming reaching 5 degrees Celsius by 2100 has been ruled out does not mean that there will be no further warming, but only the temperatures are unlikely to rise by as much as 5 degrees Celsius. But hey, globally, we are only at an increase of 1 or 1.5 degrees Celsius so far. Unfortunately, we in Europe are experiencing a higher than average rise and already have average temperatures around 2.5 degrees Celsius higher. So if the global average ends up 4 degrees Celsius or 4.5 degrees Celsius, we in Europe will probably be looking at 6 or 7 degrees. Just a few more days a year with temperatures above 40 degrees, and it will probably happen even sooner. And yet we could be generating such lovely patriotic electricity using good German wind and the sun of our own German homes. Even Germany's favorite child, the car, is facing problems. Whilst it had originally been agreed that internal combustion engines would be phased out in the EU by 2035, a development the automotive industry was preparing for, there was grumbling from the far right that this would be a bad move and that the authorities were always resorting to bans. Suddenly, there were liberal and conservative circles that wanted to be open to new technologies, arguing that renewable fuels or green hydrogen could be used instead. The fact that renewable fuels require 5 times as much energy to drive a car the same distance as an electric motor, and that there are already more than enough uses for hydrogen in the aviation sector, the chemical industry, and heavy goods vehicles, was simply ignored. There's even a fringe group that would like to see more nuclear power stations, even though we have neither an operator nor a final repository. Power stations now have a major drawback during hot summers. They have to be shut down when they can no longer discharge cooling water. This happened recently in France, involving 3 nuclear reactors and a gas-fired power station. Wasn't there a minister for economic affairs who wanted to build more gas-fired power stations? And there's another problem with the water. As I've shown here, waterways are important in Germany, but on the Elbe, freight traffic could come to a partial stillstand by September, and in some areas, ships can only operate with reduced loads. The Rhine, too, has a problem with glacier meltwater. In fact, meltwater accounts for just 1% of the Rhine's flow throughout the year, but during the summer months in particular, it acts as a buffer, making up as much as 18% of the river's flow. Once the glacier have disappeared, cargo shipping on the Rhine will also come to an end in summer. But what's the point? The glaciers are in Switzerland after all. What's their melting got to do with us? And whilst we need to plan for the future, there are other much more pressing matters that need addressing. Because warmer temperatures cause more water to evaporate, There is more water available to form clouds in the atmosphere. This can lead to longer and more intense periods of heavy rain and thunderstorms. I remember my youth well. If it had been warm during the day, there was often a brief heat inducted thunderstorm at night. That was brilliant. Lovely weather by day and a bit of rain at night. Often it didn't even last long. You just had to take a shelter for a moment, and after 20 minutes, the garden party would carry on. Now I see the fire brigades turning out more and more often in the area after thunderstorms to pump out cellars. And yet you can count yourself lucky if it's just a flooded cellar. 5 years ago, in the R Valley, entire houses were swept away by the flood waters. So now we have to improve flood defense as well. At least I haven't heard of any more Rhine floods in Cologne over the last 10 years, unlike when I was a teenager and saw them almost every year. But even on holiday, the heat causes problems. Also, I mentioned Italy in a video about popular holiday destinations. The Italian coasts have a problem with a small worm in the water, the bearded fireworm. It has always been present in the Mediterranean, but only in very specific regions with very warm water. Now that the whole of the Mediterranean is getting warmer, the omnivore can spread out without any trouble. It's not actually dangerous for humans as long as you don't step on it and then realize why it's called a fireworm. But the heat is also a problem out of the water, particularly where there isn't enough water. Since 2019, large parts of the spruce forests have died off because the bark beetle has spread. Now, it is important to know that spruce trees actually prefer slightly cooler conditions. In Germany, only the common spruce, Picea abies, is native. And because it grows so quickly, straight and tall, without much branching, it has been very popular for cultivation. Forests, such as the famous Black Forest, were deliberately planted with large numbers of spruce trees, the bread and butter tree of German forestry. After a good 60 years, usually around 80, the tree is ready for harvesting and can be felled. Strictly speaking, apart from the acid rain of the 1980s, the spruce has been doing quite well. When conditions are damp enough, it produces enough resin to make life difficult for pests. But if it remains dry for a long time, resin production ceases. Holes in the bark can no longer be sealed quickly by resin, and the bark beetle has been able to happily burrow its tunnel beneath the bark. The point here, too, is that we now need to plant German forests with trees that are climate resilient. It's just that we don't yet know exactly which ones these are. And we certainly don't want to end up planting a monoculture with just one tree species again. Incidentally, acid rain has been brought under control. That too required a great deal of money and persuasion. From the mid 1980s onwards, catalytic converters were introduced. They became mandatory by the end of the decade and across the EU from 1993. Even back then, there was a lot of back and forth, as some countries wanted the requirement and others did not. Japan and the US already had environmental standards at that time. Who was actually president of the United States back then? So, yes, Germany is hot and is getting hotter, and unfortunately, some people don't see this as important enough. In the 2021 federal elections, environmental concerns were still strong, and the Bündnis 90 Die Grünen, Alliance 90 the Greens party, benefited from this. Robert Habeck of the Greens was vice chancellor. But 4 years later, by the time of the next election, it had all been forgotten, and the promotion of renewable energy and e mobility were no longer seen as such a priority. Until recently, someone blocked the Strait of Hormuz by waging war. Well, whoever started the war probably didn't want the strait to be blocked, but presumably nobody had even considered that something like that could be happen. In my view, it was just like the attack on the Ukraine, just show off how strong we are, then the other side will back down and we'll have our victory. One news channel had counted that, according to Trump, the war had actually already ended 38 times. But at least it had the effect of showing us once again why we shouldn't make ourselves dependent on fossil fuels. Yet instead of doing what was done during the 1973 oil crisis, when 4 Sundays were designated as car free Sundays and at the same time a speed limit of 100 kilometers per hour on motorways and 80 kilometers on country roads was imposed for 6 months, thereby actually noticeably reducing fuel consumption and helping us get through that period well. The German government cut the mineral oil tax. Unfortunately, the reality is that energy saving works best when energy is expensive. That's when people install solar panels on their roofs and buy the most energy efficient appliances for their homes. So drive slowly and keep an eye on the road ahead, and it's better to pull the blinds down and keep the sun out. It's better to stay in the shade a bit longer than risk heat stroke. I'll make sure to keep a cool head too before it gets hot again. Remarks, addition, and comments in the comments. Thank you for your attention. See you in the next video.